I read a National Geographic article about tumbleweeds the other day. You know, those large, thorny creatures that dot the landscape of the old Western cartoons that you used to watch on Saturday mornings. These plants, as the author was describing it, they start off small and innocent-like with green tendrils, little flowers on the top. But before soon they turn into these teenage menaces. The author writes it as rubbery purple-veined fingers pulling back troll-like as he tried to yank them from the ground. I mean, I have enough trouble with dandelions. I don't know if I would want to mess with these things. And so these tumbleweeds grow, and then after they die, they are uprooted from the soil, and they roll wherever the wind takes them, hence the name tumbleweeds. And when they roll, they spread the seeds wherever they go. In fact, it got so bad that in the 1890s, only a few years after the first reported sight of a tumbleweed, a South Dakota legislator suggested putting a fence around the entire state to stop the infestation from going any further. Kind of like you guys tried to put a fence between the Methodists and the Presbyterians a couple of years ago, but apparently that didn't work too well either. But it was too late for him. This Russian plant had become the weed that won the West. Quite literally became a thorn in the side for generations of farmers and homesteaders. But you know, I don't think we can blame the tumbleweed all too much for this, because after all, it's really only doing what God created it to do and what He commanded it to do in the text that we see today. God specified, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so, for the beautiful lilies, the fragile roses, but also for the stubborn dandelions and those ever-annoying tumbleweeds. Up until this point in the text, God has been creating from His very being, speaking into the formless dark void that was pre-existence. In this verse, however, we see a crucial shift. No longer is the Creator doing the creating, but the creation itself is creating at the word of God's bidding. The earth itself is the Adam, the same Hebrew word for earth and humanity. It is the dirty grime that gets stuck underneath our fingernails. And it is for the first time utilizing that creative power that its Creator instilled it with. Let the earth put forth vegetation. The creation is now doing the creating. And that purposeful intent, that creation that God made it with, does not stop with just the earth. Rather, the plants and the trees themselves are created with the intent, purpose of being able to regenerate and multiply, something that we see the tumbleweed does so well. That power to create is written within their very DNA. And that same power to create is not limited also to just the fruit trees and the green foliage, for we hear the command, "Be fruitful and multiply," not once but twice in this passage, once to the living creatures that roamed the whole earth, and once to the human, the Adam, that was made in God's image. The imperative used here, "Be fruitful and multiply," makes it clear that utilizing that creative power within us is not an option. God has commanded creation to utilize that power that God instilled in His handiwork from the very beginning. I think that often when we hear the command, "Be fruitful and multiply," we limit that to the physical act of reproduction. But as humans, it's so important to remember that we were made with so much more creative ability than just the physical act to reproduce. When we are fruitful, we are participating in the act of putting forth, as in the earth put forth vegetation. This phrase is used several times throughout the text to describe the act of creation. One theologian translates the Hebrew word for this phrase as "let something which is within come out." How beautiful is that? This is how we create. What is within us must come out. The creative power is already within the earth, within the seed, within the plants, and within us. And we are commanded to use it. On the front of your bulletins this morning is an image of a Rodin sculpture. Go ahead, look at it, please. I want you to be able to see what it looks like. There's a line of thinking that understands the work of creation in Genesis as the breaking forth and outpouring of the love that existed between the Trinity, the lover, the beloved, and the bond of love in between them. Rowan Williams, the Archbishop of Canterbury, describes it this way: creation is a free outpouring of what God is, but that free outpouring makes sense because God simply is the Father of the Son, the breather of the Spirit from all eternity. What is natural to God as God in being Trinity is then freely and willingly shared in the act of creation. Listen to that one more time. Creation is a free outpouring of what God is. And in that sculpture on the front of your bulletins, you can quite literally see how the creation of humanity is the something that is within God coming out as the slender limbs of man and woman break forth from the same stone that makes up the sinewy, calloused form of God's hand. Just as a seed breaks forth from the earth with its first green shoot, so the first humans break forth from the very outpouring of what was within God. And so if we think about our act of creating as modeled after God's way of creating, letting what is already within us organically shoot forth, then that should shape the way that we think about what we create. Maybe it is a little messier, a little dirtier, and a little more out of our control than we would like to think. One summer when I was home from school, I did some landscaping work for an elderly couple that was in my church to make a little extra money on the side, which would have normally been fine, except for the fact that the wife of this couple was extremely particular about the way that her flowers were planted. Not only were they to be laid out in a particular order, which is okay, that's fine, I get it, and I understand many of you probably do that as well. You know, red, white, pink, okay, fine. But they were also to be very evenly spaced out. But it wasn't enough for her just to eyeball it. She had me measuring with a ruler exactly 5 inches between each flower, 3 inches between each row. And so I did that, for an afternoon or two with a little ruler and the little flowers. And I didn't realize the ridiculousness of it all until later that summer I was working in the yard with my mom. And let's say her planting philosophy is a lot more liberal than that. A flower here, a flower there, put a hosta in between. As long as it all gets in the ground, then it's fine. It's all good. But somehow, my mom's garden looks just as beautiful. If not, in my personal humble opinion, even more beautiful than the carefully measured out flowers that I had planted earlier. And Jesus tells this story in Matthew about a rather careless gardener who goes out to sow some seed, or maybe he just held a similar farming philosophy to my mom. Or he just wasn't paying much attention to what he was doing because the seed that he was sowing seemed to land everywhere except where it was supposed to. On the path where the animals ate it, on the stony ground, in some thorny weeds. But thankfully for him, a few seeds happened to fall upon good soil and take root. They were able to take root despite the fact that the gardener had not been very careful about where he put his seed, Or perhaps, despite the fact that maybe it was hard for him to identify where the good soil was, more so than this story leads us to believe. Maybe the thorns were hidden behind some green leaves, or maybe the rocky soil looked more fertile than it actually was. These seeds, despite nature's hiding of the good soil, or despite the farmer's carelessness, it's hard to know, was able to fulfill its creative commission, the purpose for which they were created, despite all of that. This is in the same way that the tumbleweed is blown about in the wind, spreading their seed wherever they happen to roll, and is able to create new stubborn baby tumbleweeds, despite our best efforts to keep them out. And in the same way that my mom's creative planting philosophy leads to as beautiful gardens as the ones carefully designed in the Better Home and Gardens magazine. When creation broke forth from the love of God, or when the vegetation broke forth from the unclean earth, it was not a neatly controlled process, with flowers popping up exactly 5 inches from one another. Rather, it was an organic outpouring of what was inside, an embodiment of that ability to create. God was able to work through the rocky soil and the thorns of the earth to produce something that he called beautiful, lovely, something that he called good. And that takes us to the second part, and perhaps the more difficult part of understanding our own creations. In a world where we are constantly told to be better, that what we have made is good, but not quite good enough. After all, how does the mantra go? There is always room for improvement. After being told this again and again our whole lives, it can be difficult to appreciate what we have made. After what is within us cannot stay in anymore, when it has come out of us indiscriminately, organically, we struggle to step back and look at all that we have created and call it good. There's an online photo project that is happening nowadays. It's called the Humans of New York Project, and it captures photos of people on the streets of the Big Apple and puts along it a small story or quote from the subject. And one that I saw recently featured an otherwise unremarkable woman in a denim shirt, her brown hair pulled back from her face. The photographer asked her what her greatest struggle is right now, and she replied, "Deciding when is the right time to share my artwork, knowing if it's ready or if it's ever going to be ready." It is so hard for us to just let go of what we have created, whether it be a piece of art or our children or a job or friendship, to let it go and call it good. We constantly want to fix it up just a little bit more, tweak it here or there, just to make it a little better, a little more good. But when we fail to look at what we have created and call it good, we are dishonoring the fact that it came from what was within inside of us, that it is a reflection of the God, the image of God, the Imago Dei, inside of our very selves that he created us with. It is hard to look at our own creations and call them good, especially when those creations come from spontaneously thrown seed, things that didn't fit within the careful plan that we had made. Maybe your baby didn't look like the Gerber baby. Maybe it came a little too early. or a little too late. Despite taking all the correct prenatal vitamins and doing the correct checkups, maybe the company that you had poured so much of your life into suddenly crumbled before your eyes, leaving only the broken pieces of what seemed to be wasted years and dashed dreams. Maybe your life feels like it's going in the direction of the tumbleweed. That is to say, no particular direction at all. Yet God looked at everything he had created, and he called it good. And so, in this text in Genesis today, God is calling us. No, God is commanding us to feel free to create, to throw the seed as we walk through life, trusting that God will be able to work with us, in us, and through us to create something from it, despite the thorns of our flesh. Maybe there is good soil hidden underneath those thorns after all. In the beginning, the love of God burst through the cracks of the formless void to form the first humans. And God called us good, whole, complete. He instilled in us that same power of creation, a power that comes with the responsibility to be able to step back and call it good. This power of creation, this ability to name goodness, bursts through the dirt. It sprouts through our inadequacies, and despite our careful planning, it yields something that we can look at with God's eyes and call it beautiful, call it good, even if the world sees it as just a tumbleweed.